Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right, Ed Barnhart, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I've been really enjoying hearing you speak about all the things you've been doing in your life, and I would love to just give the people that are going to be listening to this for the first time, maybe never have been exposed to your work, just give them a little overview of what you're doing in life with your Mayan Exploration Center and maybe a little bit of how you got there and some of your credentials. And we'll go from there. There's a lot to dive into in a short period of time, but we'll do our best.
Yeah, there's the big wide topic of the things that I study. Well, I'm an archaeologist. I got my PhD from the University of Texas at Austin about 25 years ago. And I've spent most of my life doing archaeology. You know, I started out kind of as a shovel bum in contract archaeology in Texas. And through my education, I was able to go to Central America and Mexico, where most of my studies have been. I've done a lot of work down there. I found a city in Belize, an ancient city, not just some regular city I stumbled into, in 1995, which kind of feels like I'm talking about my high school football career at this point. But I made a map of Palenque. I've been very involved in Maya studies, but nowadays I am a much more, I cast my net wider. I've done a lot of work all around the Americas, and I'm even branching into Southeast Asia these days. My company that I direct is called Maya Exploration Center. It's a nonprofit, and through it, we do lots of education initiatives. The most fun ones we do are travel programs. I bring people actually to the ruins, give them lectures in the evening, and they actually get to see it as we're educating about it. So oftentimes people get the impression that the Maya ruins, it's the one day that they took off of hanging out on the beach to go to Tulum, and they look around and go, well, that's a bunch of rocks. All right, back to the beach. But so I try to broaden people's experience when they show up.
That's
and,
awesome.
One of the reasons you and I are talking is that I have a podcast. I started it during COVID just to, keep myself from going mad. And I've kept it up. It's been a nice little thing. It's called Archaeo-Ed. And it's just me talking about various subjects of the Americas, ancient civilizations of the Americas, which is very few people know they even exist. It's very strange how history's just kind of clouded our knowledge of these people. And I think it wasn't until this generation that archaeology and historians have gotten enough of the picture put back together. I think at this point it deserves to be part of our American history.
Mm. Yeah, I love it. And I really love your podcast. It's so cool. And you do a great job with that. I'm wondering, do you read scripts for that? Because it's so put together. I mean, you must put a ton of
I,
time into
I,
that.
I write a script. I'm very old school. I got this notebook and I write about 20 to 30 pages worth of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say them out in bits. That's one of the reasons it's only audio, because I don't know quite how to video edit that. So I try, I clean up my mistakes a little bit in editing, but it's a script that I write, but I really try to write it like flow of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like my sentences aren't correct. I just kind of write what comes into my head, and then I say it into the microphone. But I do about, depending on the topic, sometimes I need to do some research to make sure I get my facts and figures and names correct. And sometimes, honestly, when I'm just running short on time, I'll just tell a story. And then I don't need to research anything. It's just, stories of my adventures.
It's amazing. Yeah, what a gift, because it's cool to preserve. You've done so much work and you've got so much in there in your consciousness now that it's like you better put it out there and let it preserve itself and live on. And you're doing a great job with that. It's really cool.
Well, I appreciate that. This journey of talking and explaining verbally rather than writing books and things. The truth is, I'm not a very good writer. At the start of COVID, I had a friend who's a journalist, and I decided I'm going to get to all the writing projects I never got to. And so I wrote up an article about Tulum and I sent it to him, and he politely wrote back, Ed, I think your skills are strongly verbal, which was, journalist talk for like, this is trash. And so, but I decided to take it to heart and said, the the technology we have at our disposal in this generation allows me to kind of be a storyteller in a different way. I don't have to be bound to the traditional way that archaeologists disseminated their work, which was purely in print. I can actually do this
Yeah.
and talk to folks and have a conversation. And I think, honestly, that's where my skills are. I'm still trying to write books, but
Yeah.
I should definitely hire an editor.
Yeah, and it seems more enjoyable and faster, a faster way to disseminate information because if you had to go and write all these papers and get them peer reviewed and go through all the old models, you just couldn't share it the way you could now. So I feel like you're doing a good job of just giving more people access to the big mysteries that we have. And it really opens up a whole new field of younger people coming up that maybe have never even thought to go down that avenue. So you're inspiring a lot of younger people that will then do a lot of the footwork and different things that maybe you don't want to do, you know?
Well, that is my goal. I really want to connect to the younger generation, and if I can be part of everybody growing up this time, actually knowing that there was a history before this place was called America,
Hmm.
I think that would be a a great legacy for what I've worked so hard to do, is to inspire a new generation to actually learn and know about it and incorporate it in who they are as Americans.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think it's his name is Scott, right? Your partner, friend, the guy that's was on the Danny Jones podcast with you, or what was his name?
Luke
Oh, Luke.
Cavern. I
Okay, I
love
don't know
Luke.
why.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
he's
great.
brilliant, and he's a young guy that seems to be taking on a lot of what you've learned and continuing
In
on
many
with it.
ways, Luke dragged me into this. Luke is my ear. He and I met over tacos in Austin, Texas. One time, he called me up, and I said, "Sure, I'll go meet you for lunch."
Yeah.
And we quickly realized that both of us have skills and experiences that the other needed, and so we
Hmm.
quickly made a deal. Like, Luke, you help me figure out this whole social media thing, and I'll bring you on adventures. And
That's
now,
amazing.
3 years, 4 years into our relationship, Luke's actually leading adventures for us, which I'm thrilled about.
That's amazing. Yeah, and he definitely seems very grateful and knows how cool of an opportunity that is. So that's really cool. I want to just start with people because a lot of people haven't read any of this type of work. And I started to get into Graham Hancock's work years ago, I think 15 years ago, with the Fingerprints book. And then I read a few of his other books and went and saw him speak a few times. And that was my introduction to, like, oh my gosh, history is so much weirder than we're told. And so then you go down and watch documentaries, and a lot of them you are in. You have little appearances in, which is cool. But I just, for the average person that's listening, I'm almost thinking a good place to start is like, what are some of the biggest things that people are missing about ancient civilizations or theories and about pyramids? And what are some of the biggest mind blowing facts that you could probably share with them just to pique their interest and realize that there's a billion doors behind the first door, you know?
Oh gosh, that's a wonderfully open-ended question. I could go anywhere with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are lots of exciting and little-known things. I guess you have mostly an American audience, huh? I guess.
I'm imagining so. It looks like it. There's some in Europe, but yeah.
Well, let's start there then. Uh, somehow or another, our memory of the history, or our knowledge of the memory of the United States, not talking about Mexico or South America or anywhere else, just the United States, it's amazing how few people realize that there are pyramids here. You always think people, the average Joe thinks that the pyramids are in Egypt and that's just about it. Somebody who's done a little more exploring knows there's ones in China and Mexico and Peru, but even those folks rarely come across the fact that there are pyramids here. A huge one that's over 100 feet tall is Monk's Mound in Cahokia. Now, that probably doesn't ring a bell for most people that are listening right now, but it's just outside of St. Louis, Missouri, just on the other side of the Mississippi. There is a pyramid and a giant city around it. A people called the Mississippians started that site at 900 CE. It lived for about 200 years, and the city swelled to a population of 20,000 people. And there were
Gee.
houses and temples and a huge sport court in the middle of their city center. And the city was surrounded by a palisade of huge tree-sized logs that went for, I think the number is 6 kilometers in a loop around the city. So absolutely massive. There's an older pyramid that's just as large too in the bayous of Louisiana. Especially for those, the people on the East Coast and the West Coast, like, what? Anything amazing happened in Louisiana ever? But it's there's a just it's boringly called Mound A of a site called Poverty Point, but
Mm.
it's 3,500 years old. It's as
Wow.
old as the pyramids that were being built in Egypt.
Mm.
It's earlier than, certainly the Romans, but even, it starts about when Greek civilization starts. And it's sitting right there in northern, excuse me, in northern Louisiana, and
Mm-hmm.
it's there for anybody to see. You may or may not know I do these great courses lecture series,
Yeah, they're awesome.
and I had forgotten I even said it. But at the end of my Poverty Point lecture, I say, if you don't believe me, go look for yourself and tell the Rangers I say hi. And now I go there, and the Rangers are like, "Hi, Ed. Yeah, thanks for sending all those people." First time I showed up after that, I was like, "Hi, I'm Ed Barnhart. I have this little group. We're gonna maybe a ranger has some time to talk to us." And they were like, "We know who you are."
That's awesome.
But I encourage everybody in America to take a look at this. Just Google at first Cahokia and Poverty Point. You'll
Mm-hmm.
see what I'm talking about. But if you go there, it'll blow your socks off. There really are significant advanced ancient civilizations that were right here in the United States of America. And
Amazing.
right
And
now, we're in a struggle to protect them because people don't even remember they exist. The more folks we can get knowing they exist,
mm,
the more support we can get to protect what's left.
yeah, and you were saying at one point, I think 30,000 to 60,000 years ago, there's traces of people coming into Northern America. Is that right?
Well, that's almost purely information we get from DNA studies. You know how
Okay.
these DNA guys are able to go back and look at changes and mutations over
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
So I want to distinguish that we haven't found a body that old yet, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically the only way we're going to prove that. Even, stone tools and context lead to, you know, shaky conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
But DNA studies definitely say that there was the traditional around 12,000 years ago, there was a big migration into the Americas. But
Hmm.
DNA wise, they're saying there's probably another one that happened at 30, and it is a possibility that one happened at 60. So
Wow.
nowadays we've taken this important paradigm leap, just like 100 years ago, guys like me said man showed up in the Americas no earlier than 3,000 years ago. Then there was this huge paradigm shift where now we believe solidly that we showed up at least, really, I'll say 14,000 years ago, because we've had this site in Chile forever called Monteverde, which
Mm.
is 14,900 years ago human evidence.
Wow.
So those are all pretty solid. Now this 30,000 one, this is now where we're kind of testing our boundaries. Can we actually find that?
Hmm.
And a site in White Sands, New Mexico, has just produced and really been vetted by a lot of other archaeologists footprints. So they're not humans, but they're definitely evidence of humans, a footprint.
Mm.
And in the layers of mud around and above and below the footprint, the archaeologists were able to really solid date those layers because they come on and like flood episodes really thin. It's nice when you get a really tiny but varied profile like that. And they've locked those footprints into about 23,000 years ago.
Mm.
So that's, that just recently happened, and that's one that's very exciting for archaeology.
Are
There's
the is there a lot of people in the archaeology field that are very receptive to changing their mind all the time with all this new technology and all this new information constantly coming in? Is it hard to shift paradigms, or is it stuck like most fields?
Oh, I think archaeologists are
Mm.
people like any group of people that most of them are very open. In fact, I think most of us dream of participating in one of these huge shifts in our understanding.
Cool.
There are a few bad apples in every bunch, and
Hmm.
even they are understandable, like archaeologists who have spent 50 years of their career and are in some academic chair, and then all of a sudden it looks like their entire history of work is going to be trashed by new discoveries. Those
Yeah.
guys get resistant and start arguing their case, and I understand them. And then
Yeah.
there's a few people who just make their entire living by naysaying the ideas of others.
Hmm.
But the majority of my colleagues, especially the ones I respect and want to work with, are open minded, respectful folks. I
Yeah.
know, today, especially in this space, there's a lot of animosity that's grown between, alternative theories and traditional archaeology that everybody loves a fight. So it tends to float to the surface of social media. But in actual practice, most of the people I work with, we don't lose any sleep over Graham Hancock's theories or anything.
Yeah.
We go about our business.
Yeah. And it seems like you have a lot of respect for him for introducing a lot of people to the field, but you guys have a lot of differences in opinion of how things went theory wise, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't necessarily agree with his central premise that there was some singular, very ancient civilization that we've completely lost that can be credited with seeding all of the other civilizations that grew up thousands of years later. I think that
Hmm.
that picture's more complicated. I don't think we can bring it back to a single civilization.
Hmm.
And I hope that the conversations that he and I have had, and I know he's had with many, many experts in the field, maybe, we can start a dialogue and he can change some of his ideas. Because what Graham has that, frankly, most archaeologists don't is charisma. Boy, he's a great speaker. He's a great writer. He's inspired so many people to take an interest in history, where,
Mm.
frankly, a dry intro to cultural anthropology class somebody takes in undergraduate doesn't do the job. In fact,
Right.
it runs half of the people that see it off. But Graham's great about that. And it's okay that I don't believe in all of his ideas or his mind. It
Right.
should be a dialogue. And my teacher always taught me that the paradigm shifts are not going to come from the people that are steeped in the field. They're coming from uh, other perspectives, people that have other expertise, and sometimes uh, you know out of the box or even outlandish ideas are worth discussing because they can shake us out of our rut and we can actually make some major changes in what we understand. So
Hmm.
I like what Graham's doing.
Yeah.
There's always a danger in any kind of theory that comes out of an archaeologist's mouth or someone who's more of a journalist like
Hmm.
Hancock, that people will take that information and malign it to their own purposes. So he
Hmm.
gets he gets bashed as a racist,
Mm.
but he himself is not a racist.
Mm.
He's got
Yeah.
mixed race grandchildren who read on the internet that he's a racist, which I
Right.
feel bummed out about
Yeah.
for his sake. But people will use it. They take, oh, there was an ancient race. They attach Atlantis to it and then attach a bunch of racist theories that were definitely published in the past,
Hmm.
and then whip it back around that Hancock is producing racist things where he
Hmm.
is not.
Hmm.
And I've heard him now speak more vehemently against racism, which I'm happy to see.
Cool. Yeah, that's fascinating. People like to do things like that just to discredit all of your work. It's a fascinating thing, but
Oh, it's
um,
such a sledgehammer people use on each other in the internet. I mean, not that there aren't horrible racists who need to shut up out there, but
sure.
not everybody who entertains theories that intersect with
Yeah.
culture is a racist.
Yeah, it's much easier just to say you're a conspiracy theorist or you're Hitler, or one blanket statement just shuts you down and you're like, okay, well,
This
just keep moving
the
forward.
the cancel culture. It's a vicious cycle. One of these
Yeah.
days, I'll get shot down. I don't know when or how, but
I
it'll
think it's
happen.
gonna go back the other way. I think it's at its peak and it's gonna go back the other way. But anyway, I'd love to get into talking about South America a little bit because it's so fascinating. It seems like you have the ability to really blow people's minds. You've blown mine with it, especially that the coastal, all the pyramids. There's thousands of them. You've said,
Oh
and
gosh, so
I'd love
many.
to hear about that. And then I'd also, of course, like to get into the Mayan culture because you have such a deep lens of that culture as well. But I lived with a guy, I actually met a guy a long time ago named Don Howard. He spent probably 30 years down in the jungle in Iquitos. And I ended up using some plant medicines with him and a Shipibo shaman back in the day. But he spent so many years of his life being obsessed with Chavin, and he had a lot of beautiful artifacts, like thousands of beautiful pieces, because he went there on these pilgrimages. He would try to recreate the pilgrimage to Chavin, and he would bring people to each site and drink wachuma, which was the San Pedro cactus medicine, at these ancient sites, like way back in the day. This is like early 90s, I'm thinking. And he knew a lot about the culture, and so I lived with him because he was dying of a rare blood disorder. And so for 6 months he became my friend, and he would like put on the big screen all these cool images of Chavin. And so when I started hearing your work, I'm like, God, you know so much. I wish you two could have been in a room together. But I'd love to get into some of the mind-blowing facts about that civilization and what was going on in Chavin and what was going on that whole coast over there.
Chavin, its full name is Chavin de Huantar. We
Hmm.
tend to call the culture civilization Chavin, but the site itself that I think you're referring to is Chavin de Huantar, and it's
Right.
up way high in the mountains, and it's in between. When you look, take a wide view of the topography around it and zoom out, you see that Chavin is particularly placed in the path of least resistance if someone was to walk from the Amazon to the coast where the deserts are. And the site is this wonderful mixture of imagery from the coast and from the Amazon.
Mm.
There's this repeated image of a deity that early things called the principal deity of the site. I refer to him as the Fang deity, and this is the one of the special things about Chavin is the first time that they really show tons of images of him and other things. It's the first carved religious art we have.
Mm.
The site itself, there, if you read 6 different textbooks, they'll tell you 6 different times that the site started. But we could conservatively say somewhere around, certainly by 1200 BCE, it's a major site and a pilgrimage site. We can see that people are coming from the coast and the Amazon up to deposit offerings that are all down in these amazing labyrinths under its temples.
Mm.
We might be able to push it as far back as 1800. That's a funny thing, the especially by the time an archaeological report gets to a magazine, they cannot they'll just put a single sentence there. Evidence states that the settlement began somewhere around 1800 BCE, but you as the reader of the magazine don't know whether that is represented by a pyramid or 3 potsherds. More often it's 3 potsherds. So we're kind of wiggling there about exactly how old it is, but the
Mm.
site seems to be the first really great meeting between the civilizations that are happening in the Amazon and the coast.
Mm.
And let me rephrase that. It's not really the first great meeting because by the time 2 groups of people agree to make a temple, they'll meet in the middle. That's not their first meeting. They've been at it for a while.
Yeah. And some of the temple structures, like how long do you think it took to build these things? They were so like, intricate.
They really are. They, especially Chavin, has a very advanced architectural style. The blocks are all very big and they fit together, and they do neat things like this. There's a doorway that goes into, I think, what's called the new temple that we call the black and white portal, and they use specific kinds of stone to build this doorway where it looks black and white as you walk up through it. Very sophisticated stuff and carving.
Mm.
But here's the thing, your friend who was down there with all those adventures lived in a time period where we were absolutely sure that Chavin was the mother culture of the Andes in Peru, that every other culture sprouted from what they began. But now we're in a totally different ballgame. The things that we've been finding down on the coast are thousands of years older than Chavin itself. And some of them have very fine architecture. So now, instead of Chavin being a mystery of how the heck did they get to this level of stonemasonry,
Mm.
now we understand that they're standing on the shoulders of 2,000 more years of stone technology.
Yep.
And it's funny, we had found all these sites down on the coast decades ago. A lot of them that are the most important sites that we're now investigating now, like Corral, for example, starts in 3200 BCE and has big stone pyramids about, I think they're about 15 kilometers off the coast.
Mm-hmm.
Huge, beautiful site. No art. No art on the walls, no carvings, but stone technology.
Hmm.
But that site and a number of others in that same time period, archaeologists in the 1920s and 30s went there, saw it, dug, and said, you know what? There's nothing we can sell here. There's no gold. There's no art carved. There's not even any pottery. What the heck? We're leaving this site and we're going to go find one that we can sell artifacts to museums. Because in the
Oh.
30s, that's how an archaeologist funded themselves. They found some
Mm-hmm.
artifacts, they cut some deals with museums, sent them over there, and they could continue their explorations.
Mm.
But then, like, I guess really starting in the 1970s or 80s, a couple archaeologists were like, hold on, no gold, not even ceramics? How old are those sites? And we went back to them, and then, they became these amazing paradigm shifting places. And now every year we find more and more and more.
Mm.
There's a, there, the Corral is the biggest of about 17 cities in a valley called Supe. There's all these wonderful fertile valleys that are snowmelt coming out of the Andes, and they create these fertile valleys that spill their rivers out into the coast. And these ancient civilizations made this kind of exchange network where people living on the coast were sending fish and ocean products, and people in the fertile valleys inland were sending first actually cotton. They were sending a lot of cotton nets that the
Mm.
fishermen were using. But then they started planting corn as well and other crops. So there were farmers and fishermen working in conjunction with each other in networks in these very isolated valleys.
Mm.
So Supe is one of our greatest, oldest examples now. But up the coast, there's another area called Cosma that has its own Cosma Valley and a river going through. And more I see, and I tend to see things before they get published. I'm on like weird, nerdy Facebook lines with people who talk about stuff that's not published yet.
Mm-hmm.
But we're finding things that exceed Corral's age in this Cosma Valley, and there's
Wow.
so much there. Last time I was there, there are major cities that are just sitting out in the desert, and they have a sign. The government knows where they are, but there's no guides, there's no guards, there's barely a road, and you can just walk into these places that are
Wow.
thousands of years old there. And I was laughing to myself because I stopped us in the town of Cosma and put us in a little hotel. And right across the street in a park in the middle of Cosma was an Adobe pyramid. And I
Wow.
had never even heard of it. Like, well, there it is, just outside my front door. When you were talking about thousands and thousands of pyramids, heck, I mean, they're in every one of those cities, and everybody walks by them like they're a pile of dirt. It's
God,
kind of amazing, and there's so much work to be done.
amazing.
Sorry,
I'm
I'm answering
no,
too long on
no,
your
no.
question.
Please do that. I love hearing you speak. You can rant all day, man, and it's just such a big subject. I mean, there's so much to unpack. You could do 10 lecture series for 4 hours, and you still wouldn't nick the surface. I feel like, but
I I've kind of done that. On great courses, I think I'm up to 106 lectures, 30-minute lectures, and with this next batch, I'll be at 118.
it's amazing. Yeah, so when these people in the Amazon, because we're finding out now that the Amazon jungle was so much different than we thought too, right? There's like these megalithic structures underneath, or is that not true with some of the new technology they're finding? Or
Well, take out the lithic part,
okay.
and yes, because what we're finding in the Amazon, we're finding lots of things. I want us to focus on the where the Andes connect to the Amazon, because that's where people could get stone resources and maybe build stone things. And we found a couple of them, but I
Mm,
suspect there's many more. But deeper in the Amazon, where it's seasonally inundated, they have different environmental challenges and different resources. It's very hard to find stone in the Amazon.
mm,
So what they did is they built up earthen mounds, a lot like what people in North America did along the Mississippi. When there's no
mm,
stone, you use the resources, but
mhm,
still they were building huge. There are things that I would classify as pyramids, and there are these geoglyphs, as we call them, huge enclosures that are geometric shapes. But when I
mm,
say huge, they're like, a couple of football fields on the inside, and the enclosure around them are mounds that are, 5 to 10 meters tall. Some of them, they're
mm.
huge, and they go on. The scale at which they were built is
Okay.
amazing. Someone, you can't just start building a geometric, square that's 400 meters on a side and not
Mhm,
blow it unless some architect was guiding how they built them.
mm,
So there's a knowledge there. That's one of the fun things about archaeology is that we're detectives. We got to like come up with clues like that and back into what did they need to know to make this. And in the
mm,
case of these geoglyphs, there's obviously rudimentary surveying techniques. There's interest in mathematics through geometry, and we're not just finding a couple of them. We have found hundreds of them now, and they're in places where cattle industry opened up the land all of a sudden, chopped down the trees, and we're seeing these.
wow. So what does that tell you as far as like rewriting the way you think about the people in the Amazon and maybe how much older and more sophisticated it was for a lot longer? Is that what it is?
All of the above. I
Yeah.
think it's more sophisticated. I think there was a greater population. I think they were able to farm in a way that was unexpected to us. There's a famous old archaeologist named Betty Metgers who wrote this kind of pivotal paper about the Amazon that she called Counterfeit Paradise. And her argument was, regardless of the biodiversity and the seemingly large amount of resources, it's absolutely impossible to farm in the Amazon. And so these ancient people were never able to gather in large enough groups because they couldn't be supported by intensive agriculture.
Mm,
But that has been thrown out the window.
wow.
A lot in the initial person who really pushed back and who's now kind of another celebrated character is an archaeologist named Anna Roosevelt. Nice lady and really brave. I mean, she's gone deep, deep, deep in the Amazon in places where people fear to go.
Mm-hmm.
And she's come up with, there's amazing things on the mouth of the Amazon, the like stone built buildings out there, but
Mm,
interior, she's found ceramics in caves that date back to 9,000 BCE. The
wow.
oldest ceramics in all of the Americas, Anna Roosevelt found them in the Amazon, which
That's
is,
crazy.
boy, that's confusing, isn't it? How in
Yeah.
the world did ceramic technology begin in the middle of the jungle? And again, she did that before we really started finding all these geoglyphs. First, a bunch were found in Bolivia, and then a bunch were found like near Venezuela, and then a bunch more were found in Brazil. And the more pieces we
Wow.
get, it's looking like a contiguous area.
Yeah.
We can't prove that yet, but boy, I mean, it's certainly all around the exterior, and the deeper brave archaeologists get inside, the more we find. So it's
Jeez.
looking like a hugely pervasive culture. Now, I should say that most of those geo works, as I'm talking about, they date to earliest that I've seen about 0 AD BC. So, like about 2,000 years ago, which is nothing
Hmm.
to sneeze at. And some of them are much older. Another
Okay.
funny thing about them is that they're putting in perspective old chronicles that sounded like nonsense and we really discarded.
Mm.
The most famous one is Oriana, who was sent by Pizarro over the Andes and down through the Amazon to find the mouth of the Amazon so they could both find an easier way in and out that didn't involve Panama
Mm.
and jumping or going around South America. But he was also looking for cinnamon. But in his journals of his kind of disastrous adventure trying to get through the Amazon, he reports that he saw cities and that
Wow.
they were led there on roads that were like 30, 40 feet wide to major cities with kings.
Wow.
And people kind of thought that was madness, but we seem to be finding the evidence of what he was talking about.
So
Another really
cool.
funny one is the ones in Bolivia. Erickson is the main archaeologist there, but he's found these networks where there's mounds that'll have enough space for like 30, 40 homes to be on them, and they're led to by causeways. They're all raised, and in between there are smart places to farm and to do fishing wares, but the there's like a spider web of these raised causeways that lead to major and minor nodes. Some of them just peter out to a place where there's two houses and a little mound. Some of them are major mounds.
Mm.
So that's what he saw. But then he goes back to the Portuguese documents, and I think Spanish as well, where the priests are down there trying to indoctrinate people. And they're talking about the functioning life of these cities. They're explaining the same thing, that they're mounds connected by causeways and that they go for miles and miles. And a funny
Wow.
little part that the Spanish said about that is, despite them having this incredibly large road network where they could create an economy, they seem to mostly use the roads to go from party to party. I
Jeez.
thought
That's
that was
crazy.
amazing. They were like, these people are, what are they doing? They're just having fun.
It's fascinating. It seems like the more you dig with any field of science, it just gets weirder and more interesting. It's not like it's solid. It doesn't solidify and get more narrow. It just expands and gets weirder and it keeps unfolding and unfolding like an onion, you
And
know?
there's so many things that we really need to go back to. I mean, that story that I just told you was low hanging fruit. It was
Mm,
sitting in a library. Nobody had to go into the Amazon to actually take that information seriously. But
mm-hmm.
it wasn't until someone like Erickson did that we go back. I mean, there's so much to learn that we learned and didn't understand what we learned.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You just need more eyeballs and curiosity. That's all it is, huh? Time and
And open
curiosity
minds,
and
let's
openness.
go back through a lot of things that people disregarded and give them a next look.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So with the Chavin place, it's like the ceremonial site is what people think. Why do you think people would take that giant heap of an adventure on and risk their lives almost to get there from both sides, from the Amazon and from the coast, to do the sacred sacraments? They had Vilca. It was a snuff, which I've heard you speak of, and Don Howard would say it was a tree. I think it's called the Vilca tree. But they said that a lot of the people would sniff that and then the Wachuma ceremonies. It's like they really gave a lot of energy and attention to these sacraments, right? Is that what the risk was for? Was ceremonial sites?
Um, it's it almost certainly had a religious purpose, and that's sacred sacrament. We can put all that verbiage in there. What exactly they were doing, we're not totally sure.
Mm-hmm.
But there is an interesting element, those what you're talking about, the Vilca and also ayahuasca, come from the Amazon side.
Mm-hmm.
Ayahuasca is a big vine that only grows there. And I got a lot of pushback by saying that people snuffed or shot up their nose or butt ayahuasca. Everybody told me it was the Vilca first. So many comments, especially on Lex Friedman's podcast, that I had that all wrong. That's funny, I might have should have qualified, but I am absolutely sure that there are Amazonian groups who are also doing ayahuasca in that fashion.
Mm-hmm.
They shoot it up with a blowgun, either up the nose or up the butt. Not every one of them, and they probably do that Vilca as well, but
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of moot points in what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Either way, these substances, there's an interesting wall on the side of Chavin de Huantar's main temple, the wall that faces the Amazon side. So if people are walking up
Mm-hmm.
from the Amazon, the first thing they see in the temple is this big wall with a bunch of faces on it. And the faces are interesting. They're little stone heads that project off the wall. So they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
3D and looking out.
Yeah.
And they are going through what looks like a transformation. Some of them are very human.
Yeah.
Some of them are part human, part jaguar, and some of them are totally jaguar. But a few of them have these large wads of snot coming out of each nostril, and they're rolling down their face. And we know from modern ethnography as well that the Amazonians, when shamans go into trance, they
Yeah.
have the power to transform into jaguars. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, have
I mean,
you
are
done?
we seeing in a really, pictorial way, welcome people who snort drugs and they bleed out your nose?
Yeah. Well, and it seems like a silly subject to someone from the outside looking in, but I've had the Vilca experience and it is unbelievable. It's the most incredible experience that you could possibly have in your life. Not saying everyone should consider it or do it, nor I actually think most people shouldn't. But the way that I got to do it, it felt like, all right, this is the right setting for it, and there's never going to be an opportunity again. But I could see now from having that experience, and I'm curious if you've had these types of experiences, you start to go, okay, I could see why they would build temples around this and have such a deep, profound humility towards what you would call the gods or God or spirit, because that type of experience it sort of trumps anything you could go read in a history book. You're like, oh my God, we don't know anything, but it's just so hard to put into words. It's like you have to have it. It'd be like trying to talk about an orgasm before you've ever had one.
Yeah,
It's that profound.
it's probably a
But yeah.
good analogy. Yeah, I not lately, but I have certainly done my share of experimentation, and it is not for everyone. If you're not prepared to really see inside yourself, don't go there.
Hmm,
But
exactly.
it is profound, and nowadays it's helping a lot of folks. I'm glad that professionals are involved. It's almost akin to those terrible days when abortion was totally illegal and people had to do it with hangers. There's
Oh,
so many more. People are safer under the guidance of people who are knowledgeable in medicine
mm,
in both those contexts. Nowadays, there's a lot more acceptance, and people can do it.
hmm,
Not in a dark alley with some weird guy. Powerful. It is powerful, and it's certainly to them. I think there's a totally different perspective. We look at it through our Western modern eyes. You
hmm,
you may have been enlightened by your experience, but to them, there was another spirit world that
hmm,
we could contact through using these hallucinogens, or any way in which we, reached that state, that
mm,
altered state. Marceli Eliades called it the ecstasy. A
mm,
nice, kind of over the top word for it, but they believed that there was another world that you could connect to, and that the dead resided there, and supernatural beings resided there, and gods resided there, and you could connect with them
Mm.
through journeying there. And they
Mm-hmm.
saw these experiences as kind of a little death. They,
Mm-hmm.
the dead were over there, and what you're doing is you're stepping into this liminal space by putting your body in a near death state, and that's where you enter and
Yeah.
safely come out, hopefully with the help. Apprentices are trained by
Mm-hmm.
shamans, and it's not, it's not a theory to them, it's fact.
Yeah.
I,
And
I, wi- I wonder what the world would be like if this terrible clash of cultures hadn't happened, and those ancient ideas were brought into modern science intact. What would the world be like today? I
yeah,
think they would have as profound an impact on modern medicine as ancient Chinese medicine does.
absolutely. And our architecture wouldn't be so boring and so
Oh
cheap.
my gosh.
You know
I
what
had
I
a I
mean?
had a friend from Finland, a grad student who was working in University of Texas,
Uh-huh.
and he brought his buddies over to take an incredible road trip through the United States. And he came back just depressed. He was like, "We went all the way to Nashville, and it was great to see, the Elvis Shrine." But he said, "Just forever, we just passed, a 7-Eleven and a Walmart and a post office, and a
Yeah.
7-Eleven and a Walmart and a post office. Like, where's the character in America?" I was embarrassed. I was like, I mean, take a different route. That was a bad route from
Yeah.
Texas to Tennessee. No, I mean,
Yeah. Well, and it's just so crazy, like how much time and energy, and we don't even know how they built a lot of these. Even like I know you talk about Egypt, but when people break down the numbers and the precision and the mapping out of the Mayan calendar and these things, it's like God, there was so much energy involved in creating these beautiful structures all over the world, and now we build cheap, lightweight construction, cheap plastics. It's just a complete de-evolution of our consciousness almost, and where we're just hyper focused on this
the
temporary fleeting.
a new term in our world is planned obsolescence. Our grandfathers would roll over in their grave to even contemplate that.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And
That's
how,
that's that's just terrible.
yeah, I don't get it. But yeah, I'm wondering what your theory is about the nature of why there's pyramids everywhere all at the same time, and the stone building technology. Like, how did the information travel, or how did everybody seem to build these similar things all over the globe at the same time frame, or at different time frames, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, a time frame, we've got thousands of years of pyramid building, and in some places it happens thousands of years earlier before others. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that alone makes me lean towards, independent development. But my explanation when it comes to pyramids is pretty boring, really.
Mm.
Um, before the advent of cement or rebar, if you wanted to make a tall structure, something that was as high up and sturdy as you could, if you try to do that with kids' blocks, you can make a tower, but it's too easily knocked over. You end up making something with a fatter base that goes up to a thinner top.
Mm.
And in the end, that becomes a pyramid. In the United States, we call them mounds, but you tend to terrace them so they don't, the rain won't come, and you end up creating a pyramid shape
Mm-hmm.
that is the human compunction to build a massive building is, I think, ubiquitous and inside our spirit.
Mm.
So is exploration.
Mm.
But in practice, before modern construction materials, you end up making a pyramid.
Yeah. But that much energy and precision and time, and it's almost like, why build it? What do you think about that? Like, why build these pyramids? It's not just to build something tall and cool.
I think it's legacy. I think all of us inside fear the finiteness of our life, hope that there's something that lives on beyond us, and that
Mm.
there's building a big building together is like a big WPA project. First, everybody has a purpose and something to do.
Mm.
But when you're done with it, you're a people who did a thing. And, the bigger it is, the bigger you are, the bigger your memory is. So I think
Mm.
it's kind of human hubris that that had us develop these things, but it's also social cohesion. We are social beasts. We want to work together. We want to be together, and we have aspirations. And some of them said, let's build something like Stonehenge, where people will remember us long before after we're gone. And together, that creates community pride and cohesion and confidence in their ability to do things.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds kind of boring, maybe, but I love the anthropology that talks about how we are the same as humans. It's all fun and well to talk about, oh wow, those guys put bones in their nose. That's weird. But the things that talk about, our aspirations as a human, our fear of the finiteness of our life, our sacrifices for our children, those are the things that I really love, and I think create a solid foundation for theory of human parallel development, that there are certain things that innately we do
Mm.
along our evolutionary path that is not diffusion. Diffusion happens too. I
Yeah.
mean, every great idea, especially the best ones, they spread far and wide.
Yeah.
There's definitely, within the argument that I just made that pyramids are independently connected, there's another diffusionism that's happened. Each one of these areas where they're independently uh, invented, that idea is copied by the neighbors, and then the neighbors, and then the neighbors. That's called diffusionism in anthropology, and that exists too, but it's not a
Mm-hmm.
singular explanation. If we, that's my main problem with Hancock's theory, is that it didn't diffuse from a single spot.
Yeah.
It's I've of course thought about this for most of my career, about how to explain to myself what I see.
Mm-hmm.
There's both diffusionism and independent invention. I
Mm.
love Peru that we're talking about, because so many things, it's so clear that those guys could not have had contact with the Sumerians or the Egyptians or the Greeks. When they came up with the idea for a pyramid, there was no precedent anywhere. When they came up with the idea to mummify bodies in Peru, there are mummies way older than the mummies in China or Egypt in Peru.
Mm.
They didn't they neither got that from Egypt nor gave that to Egypt. They're just too geographically separated
Yeah.
to have done that. And there's no archaeological evidence. We're looking. I could be open to an argument that one met the other, but you got to show me the artifacts. Where are the
Mm-hmm.
diagnostic things that prove to us they made contact?
Yeah.
But diffusionism and these independent things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like you see these things on the internet all the time. One of the biggest tropes that I see all the time is that one where they show people carrying handbags. Look, there's a one in Sumeria, and there's one in the Maya area, and there's one in South America. These guys must all be connected.
Mm.
Well, I mean, that's possible,
Yeah.
but I think that it's a human thing that everybody invents bags. We end
Sure.
up wanting to carry stuff, and we make a bag. Same way that, like, you and I are wearing clothes. Every civilization in the world decided to wear clothes. Is it because one guy in Sumeria decided he didn't want to be naked anymore? No, it's a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
We built houses independently.
Yeah.
We do all sorts of things that are kind of uh, our capacity coming out as we evolve.
Yeah. And their understanding of space seemed to be pretty sophisticated. Obviously, we can get into the Mayan stuff. And I wonder, too, if maybe they just knew that they were going to be wiped out eventually. So they built these megalithic structures to live through time, to then share all of the knowledge and preserve the knowledge, almost like a time capsule, you know? And if you know you're going to be wiped out and there's going to be nothing left, the best thing you could do is to build it from stone and to preserve all of your knowledge into these structures.
Well, I don't think you necessarily need to believe you're going to be wiped out to want your memory and your deeds to uh, outlive you.
Yeah.
The Maya did create these amazing hieroglyphic texts that now that we can read them, and we couldn't until the 1970s, they're telling us the amazing deeds of kings and cities and the battles they fought and the
Mm.
names of their children and artists and courtesans. We're
Mm-hmm.
getting all that sort of stuff. And it's funny. I mean, it seems like, why did the Maya do that? But nobody asks why the Greek did it or
Mm.
why the Egyptians did it. Is there a big mystery as to why the Greeks recorded all sorts of history and put it on temples and things and told us about their gods?
Mm.
No, I think in some regards there's a innate human or American bias to see the cultures before us in the Americas as others and the Greeks and the Romans as the in group.
Ah,
And
I
so we
see.
understand their motivations through our own desire to record our history and be praised for our deeds, where we tend to like first theorize that the same kinds of information out of the Maya are some sort of
Mm.
ritual mystical thing.
Yeah.
They're humans like us with avarice and wanting to toot their horn.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm irritated with the Maya kings that they are more narcissistic than even Egyptian kings. Egyptian kings will eventually, every once in a while they'll commission uh, texts on the wall of a temple that talk about recipes or about stories of deeds or gods. The Maya are always every stele is I'm the king. I was born this day. I was crowned this day. I beat these guys up. I married this chick, and then I died. It's just a broken record.
That's
The
hilarious.
ceramics tell us fun stories, but the monuments they're just narcissism.
Just so funny. That's one of the best things about you in your way of articulating this stuff is you can really blow through a lot of the BS, you know? It's fun. It's just I like the practical nature of how you speak about this stuff. It's funny.
Thanks.
Um, I'd like to get into the Mayan stuff soon, but I wanted to touch on Gobekli Tepe because that seems to be quite a cool discovery for us as a modern species here. So can
Oh,
you
I'm
talk?
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. I've never been there yet. I'm just an armchair archaeologist on that site as well. But boy, it's so exciting. And Gobekli Tepe is now just the first thing we found. Now the whole region is being called the Tas Tepler,
Mm,
and there's Karan Tepe and a whole bunch of tepes out there. And Karan Tepe's older than Gobekli Tepe, which was like 9,000 years old, a stone built megalithic temple. Actually, not just one, these circular temples, there's a bunch of them at Gobekli Tepe that they keep excavating. And they have carvings of animals. They're just absolutely amazing. Again, paradigm shifting. Uh, Hancock's over the moon about their existence. It's well, he wrote. We didn't know that when he wrote Fingerprints of the Gods. So this, it's exciting, and I'm
hmm.
excited too. I mean, it's like it's like finding a Cadillac under a Maya pyramid. Like,
Yeah,
what the hell is that? That's thousands of years older than anything we knew,
yeah.
and it's also such a weird desert region. I've seen some folks suggest that it was more fertile back in that time, but I haven't seen anything that really begs that point. They haven't gone as far as to say they were doing agriculture. So they
Mm,
are like still in hunter gatherer mode, and yet they're building giant megalithic temples, things, and they're living sedentary lives. It's somebody's living there full time,
hmm.
which is, at that time period, at 9,000 years ago, that's a revolution in and of itself. I mean, most humans, there's nomads that travel long distances, but even humans that live in a region still are doing a migrational pattern through their year. They're not living
Hmm.
in one place. They're making camps.
Yeah.
They tend early humans at that time tend to pick what we call ecotones, areas where one kind of ecology meets another, so they kind of double their resource base. They
Mm,
want to be like in the foothills of the mountains. so they can be, picking berries one season and hunting the other season, but they move, so they're campsite people.
Hmm.
Gobekli Tepe is definitely sedentary life. There are people who must have built and lived there full time.
Yeah. There's no other
I
way,
have a
right?
pet
Like,
theory about it,
I'd
which I
love
could
to.
be wrong about. You want to hear it?
Yes, please. I'd love to, because it seems like you'd have to have agriculture and organized labor to go and build this stuff.
The headline that the chief archaeologists that first found Gobekli Tepe were saying is, this is proof that religion can be the inspiration for sedentary life, that it doesn't have to be subsistence based, either aquatic or farming.
Mm.
And they do that, they make that argument because there's those wonderful carvings of all of the animals on the big columns in the circular temples. But I read one of the first articles of the first, I want to say that the first archaeologist was Polish. Uh, the internet slays me on these things when I get them wrong, so you might not be Polish.
Yeah.
But he was talking about when he first found the site that it was totally covered in lithic debris. That he walked up, as he walked up on top of where he found the temples, that it was going crunch, crunch, crunch under his feet, and he picked it up, and it was like chert. It was silica that
Mm.
you make old tools out of, like arrowheads and spearheads and things.
Mm-hmm.
And that really hit my mind because that happened to me in the Maya jungle. I was mapping out this site called Chanchich in Belize, and me and my partner Jim were going from one building to another. We'd map out one building, find another one, put that on our piece of graph paper, and as we walked towards this one group we saw, all of a sudden, crunch, crunch, crunch under our feet, and we moved the leaves around, and we saw all of this lithic debris. The stuff that we knew from there was definitely tool making. It was people taking nodules of chert and whacking them until they made an arrowhead out of it. And all around this cluster of buildings was all this debris. Now we understand it as a lithic workshop where somebody was making stone tools. So when this guy said that crunch, crunch, crunch happened, it got me thinking, hold on, is there an abundance of chert and stone tool material there? Is that what's happening? Because at that time, everybody's a hunter gatherer. You can gather wild foods or you can get animals. Neither one of them really existed in abundance in this desert area. But
Mm.
you know what did exist? The best stone material to make the stone tools everyone relied on. So I think it's commerce. I think that they built up a place to protect a resource that was stone tool manufacture, and that groups of hunter gatherers came in to basically purchase great tools.
Mm.
It's like, somebody buying a John Deere tractor today. If you want the best tool that won't break on your elephant, you should get them from Gobekli Tepe. And so they came in and they traded animals and food and resources for the stone. And the stone had to be protected, and the temples are like freaking hunting lodges. Why
Mm.
are there only animals and not humans? And these aren't magical animals, they're normal animals. There's also a bunch of statues of men holding their dicks. That sounds like a hunting lodge to me. A bunch of pictures of animals and guys holding their dicks. I think I think it's a tool, it's a hardware store.
It's
And that
pretty.
the thing that got them to settle there permanently was control of an important resource, which was stone tools, and the payment they got was meat and things that were gathered and hunted by the people who were their customers.
Yeah. Well, That's a cool theory. It just seems like quite a overly sophisticated hunting lodge as far as the amount of stone and just to build something like Gobekli Tepe. It seems like why would they go and waste all their energy to build that for a hunting lodge or for this resource center? It just seems like more of a
Well, I
mystery.
mean, the iconography is hunting lodge, like like
Yeah.
the hunting lodge always has a bunch of heads of
Uh-huh.
deer up, and
But if you're in survival
pictures of
mode, man.
ladies laid out on trucks or something.
Uh-huh.
Same, but you're right. The resource that they got. Now I'm just coming up with this right on the fly. Why
Mm-hmm.
did they build these big things? As I said earlier in your program, I think a lot of these things are WPA projects. I think they're putting people to work before there's like a monetary economy. People work in exchange for things. And so they may have also had a program. If you don't want to show up with food, well, then show up with labor.
Mm,
Come on in. And as it became a successful project, they had to come up with bigger and bigger things to incorporate that basically corvée labor. The
mm,
taxation for having the things is people building things. I think a lot of the Inca world was built that way.
mm,
Once they had 10 million people that had to pay their taxes through labor, you start coming up with bigger and bigger projects
mm.
like Machu Picchu. So,
Fascinating.
these are all theories. I'm just having fun. I don't know
Yeah.
this as a fact. Go ahead and roast me, internet, if you'd like.
Yeah.
But these are the kinds of things that they're inspiring, aren't they? Isn't it fun to think about these? That's what Graham Hancock did to you. He put the bug in you.
Yeah.
And
I
even the archaeologists that gripe the most about Graham Hancock, when you really get to talking to them, admit like, well, it was really stories of King Arthur and Egypt, the fantasy tales of the Greek gods that inspired me to be an archaeologist. How is that different
mhm.
than modern folks being inspired and interested by guys like Graham Hancock?
Yeah. And it's fun. It's just fun to be curious and get into the exploration phase and be sort of blown away by things and also be okay with the mystery. I think that's a lot of our problem as a species is that the mystery and the unknown seems to drive people to want this overarching simple answer with everything. Everybody wants to have the answer so that we can have a little control in our mind because the unknown is the truth. We don't know how we got here. We don't know where we're going when we die. And so that weird part of us that the uniqueness of being human is that we know we're going to die, and most species probably don't. And so everything revolves around this denial of death thing. And so I think a lot of what drives us is the neurotic behavior patterns to sort of have an answer to control this mystery.
Absolutely. But in my line of work, mystery is job security.
Exactly. Yeah, that's beautiful. You chose a good line of work for sure. Um, Another thing I wanted to get into is like, what are your thoughts on maybe these ancient civilizations ever coming up with a way to fly or sail before we ever thought they could to get to other continents? Have you ever thought about that? And then we just have no artifacts left because it just gets churned up and buried? Or do you think it's possible
Well,
that they had flight?
I don't see any evidence to really point me in that direction. I see people in bird costumes. There's that funny thing in Egypt, the little wooden model of the bird that they're always saying is a model of a plane.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think there's
Okay.
uh, any basis for that.
Yeah.
You know, on this regard too, I've been trying to come up with analogies that help people think through, the logic or illogic of such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
My professor Linda Sheely was great at that. She was always coming up with analogies that actually brought a point home to people.
Mm-hmm.
But if if a culture came up with the ability to fly, that's a that's a huge technological leap. That is magic.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be replicated. And it would be replicated and it would be society altering. The analogy I would draw is the invention of electricity. Think of how that idea went from experimentation and kind of parlor trick to wiring the entire world. It was, it was decades from invention to electrification of most of the, at least first world, like all the cities that we had. Suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
every gas lamp was replaced with a bulb
Mm-hmm.
so quickly. So, and that happened in, a decade or two. Huge advance, and we never went back, and it transformed things, and it was foundational to
Mm.
build a ton of things that used electricity. Once we had electricity, it wasn't just about light bulbs, it was about all the machines that we now have, these computers we talk through now.
Yeah.
So, if such a technology was made, it should have a reverberating effect through archaeology. The things like that should flower.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we find these isolated, kind of enigmatic examples that tantalizingly point to a possibility,
Mm-hmm.
I am a boring curmudgeon archaeologist in the regard that you got to show me the artifacts. What, that a an invention that profound would have effect that
Yeah.
would be much wider than the actual object that we think indicates it.
Okay. Cool. I like that analogy. It's great. I just was curious what your thoughts were on it. Let's go into the Mayan culture and talk a little bit about that because you seem to have quite a deep lens on that, probably more than most. And it'd be cool to hear some mind-blowing facts about the Mayan and also just the amount of human sacrifices. I remember you rattling off some of the numbers, and it was unbelievable. That was a I don't remember which podcast, if it was Lex or who, but it was like, let's hear some more of that so people can be a little bit blown away by it.
Well, certainly I do know more than most about the Maya, but that's what happens when you pick a completely esoteric field to dedicate your life to.
Yeah.
um, and in terms of sacrifice, you probably are talking about the Aztecs. The Aztecs were crazy, bloodthirsty sacrificers. It was a part of
Mm,
everyday life in Aztec cities that somebody somehow got sacrificed almost daily. And
jeez.
there were festival times or inauguration of new building times or temples where at least they say they would sacrifice thousands of people at a single event.
Mm-hmm.
Just nuts. The Maya were not so much like that, especially in their classic period form. We've got, the Maya span a large area and a large time period. We roughly call them, those time periods, the pre-classic, the classic, and the post-classic Maya.
Okay.
Pre-classic, they're evolving, obviously. Classic, they're building the big cities and their population surges. And then post-classic, they're much more influenced by central Mexico's cultures, which flower into the Aztec. And so the last phase of Maya civilization, they do become more sacrifice oriented and bloody, but it's I blame it on the Toltecs and the Aztecs.
The influence of them
They
just made it
kind of,
more.
yeah, they got caught up in the whole thing. But in the classic period, at least the sacrifices that they choose to show us are of two varieties. They're either sacrifices of warriors that were captured in ritual combat, so a very limited circumstance, not just, virgins. They were
Mm,
actually warriors who fairly took their chances and got nabbed. Or it was the king himself doing bloodletting sacrifices, in
mm,
which they would, if it was a queen, she'd cut her tongue. If it was a king, he'd cut his penis and then drip that blood onto paper, burn that paper, and the smoke would become the conduit through which he'd talk to his ancestors.
wow.
Anthropology calls that auto sacrifice. And it was such a weird and foreign idea to Western minds. Like I was saying earlier, there are things that we just don't understand what we're seeing, and
Mm-hmm.
we need to go back and look at it. there was Maya art clearly showing kings cutting their penises and burning the blood to contact ancestors. We just didn't understand what we were looking at.
Mm.
It wasn't until my professor, Linda Sheely, who passed away in 1994, I think, somewhere around there, maybe
Mm.
a little. No, I'm sorry, it was 2000. It was 2000. It was that's when I met her. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, she wrote this book with some partners called Blood of Kings,
Mm.
and totally changed the way we looked at this Maya art. All of a sudden we saw this thing that we call auto sacrifice, and a very interesting foreign idea to us.
Mm.
We Westerners, we totally get, publicly executing your enemies, but the king gets up and cuts himself and dances, and the sacrifice is made by the guys in charge.
Mm. Yeah,
What?
that's
That's
weird.
so weird. But we have great evidence. Now we know the hieroglyph that says bloodletting. And
Wow.
funny enough, it's a penis. Why didn't we see that before? But now that we understand, we see a totally different perspective.
Wow. And
Now
she
the
had a,
Aztecs, they love to sacrifice other people.
yeah. And let's hear about some of those numbers of the Aztec sacrifices. Because I think that was pretty crazy. They were standing in like a foot deep of blood or something. There were so many.
That's what Sahagun recorded from Aztec informants, that in the final iteration of the main temple of the capital of the Aztecs, the city was called Tenochtitlan, and the temple we just call the Templo Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
But it has, I think, 9 phases from the first version of it, built up like a Russian doll over. That last one, they say that the inauguration ceremony of the temple took 3 days, and during that time, 20,000 people were sacrificed,
God.
specifically by ripping their hearts out on top of the temple.
Wow.
And it was reported and perhaps elaborated that the sacrifices were coming so fast and furious. It wasn't just like one altar, it was multiple altars. So multiple people were being simultaneously sacrificed,
Mm.
and that the priests were ankle deep in the blood as it poured off the top of the temple.
And this is all
That
men, right? Being sacrificed?
assumably that, again, mostly the Aztecs sacrificed warriors that were captured in battle. It's
Okay.
funny if you take a look, if your folks can just Google like Aztec or Maya warrior scenes. If there are not many battle scenes, but we have them. But they're using mostly spears, and all of their spears are down.
Mm.
If it was Europe, they'd be up and they'd be trying to push it up into somebody's chest cavity and kill them.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the goal in their warfare. They want to handicap them. They want to take their legs out or the bottom of their spine out so they're
Mm.
alive, but they can drag them back to be a sacrifice. It's
Wow.
when you understand that, and then you look at their scenes of battles, you start noticing, wow, is there anybody in this whole battle that's going for a kill shot?
Mm-hmm.
No, nobody
Oh,
is.
that's a
It's
trip.
fascinating because they're dragging them back. Now, the
Yeah.
Aztecs had, they had some sacrifices that involved children, they had sacrifices that involved women. There was a particularly noble one where a young, handsome man in his teens would be chosen for the sacrifice, and
Mm.
he would live for a period of years where they would train him in art and music and warfare and politics, just kind of make him like the best of Aztec society. But
Mm.
when the time came, he had to walk up without any blubbering or being pulled up there and allow himself to be sacrificed. And it was, the Aztec uh, making the best of them and then purposely giving them to the gods.
Jeez, that's
I
crazy.
think
The amount.
that's a thing that we, from our Western perspective, don't really appreciate. Sacrifice is such barbarism, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, God, that's so like ritually violent. What are you doing? But to them, it was a true sacrifice in that word. They weren't just killing the village idiot or the woman that pissed everybody off. They understood that the gods don't want your trash. They're wanting your most precious people. That's why brave warriors who were captured on the field of battle, that's a guy of caliber.
Mm,
That's a guy of bravery and skill and
yeah,
action, and that's a proper sacrifice. A young man who you trained forever, he's a proper sacrifice. And as barbaric as it sounds, humans treasure nothing more than our children.
right.
A child sacrifice is as brutal as you can get, and or as as painful as you can get. And again, sounds weird to us, but anybody who really has read the Bible, there's this moment where God has this guy named Abraham all set up to sacrifice his kid. And then he's like, aha, trickster God, you don't have to do it. But he did need to know that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own child to show his reverence.
Yeah.
Not that far off what the Aztecs were doing.
God, that's a trip. And the amount, if you're in battle too, to have the amount of resources and give that much energy to drag the people back to do the sacrifice, it's like how much more energy that took. It's so crazy.
But it got weird and twisted for the Aztecs. They had a number of kind of like a middle class people who could participate in some of these festivals. And they had slaves that you could buy in the market, and you could have them do whatever you want, including just kill them.
Mm,
You could actually buy yourself a slave, which is an expense, and killing them is a economic sacrifice, but it got kind of out of hand. There were lots of places where the Aztecs were sending out their Pochteca traders to establish places far away where at first they were just like, hey, nice Quetzal feathers you got. Oh, rubber, we'll take some of that. Like, oh, how about that person? You want to
mm,
sell me that guy? And then they'd bring them back, and those people ended up there. It got weird. I think that's kind of a line to me when you find somebody afar, make them a slave, bring them into the city, and then sacrifice them.
mm, mm.
That's crossing. I mean, not that sacrifice didn't already cross the line, but that's
Yeah,
crossing the next line.
that's crazy. Yeah, no kidding.
And
Um,
I firmly feel that even though the Aztecs were on the march and probably would have taken over all of Mesoamerica and completely dominated the Maya within decades before the Spanish showed up and ruined the party for everyone, I think they wouldn't have lasted because they, a an empire based on fear can only go so far before people have nothing left to lose and
mhm,
they rebel.
right. That's cool. Very strange time. I can't imagine if you were in a time capsule and to go see how things were going down then. That's a trip. You've geeked out quite a bit on the Mayan calendar. I'd love to hear just some of the overarching mind blowing facts if you have some moments for that about the Mayan calendar, just some of the details of the complexity of it. And do you mind sharing some of that?
Sure, sure. I do love the Maya calendar. I have been hard at work learning it, understanding it for decades now, and there are still aspects I don't understand. If you want to see, where I'm at today, you could look at my website that's out there for free called barsanddots.com.
Mm,
Me and a great computer programmer named Matt Neal put it together as a reinvention of the first bars and dots that was made in the 1980s. But it's a great way to play with the calendar and try to understand its math for yourself.
mm-hmm.
Work in progress.
That's
Comments
awesome.
appreciated. I'm trying to make it understandable as much because it's complicated.
Mm,
The Maya had multiple ways of telling time. They didn't have like hours. They had day and night, but there were multiple cycles that they were tracking that were independent cycles. And when they wanted to tell you a date on a typical stone monument, they would use at least 5 of those cycles. So a first column of glyphs would be, 20, 30 glyphs could be used just to tell you what day it was.
Wow.
And the text is so long because it's all 5 of those cycles running concurrently, and they're watching them numerologically and getting excited when they meet a junction that's important to them. And it's so complex. It's not the most accurate calendar in the ancient world. That's kind of a misnomer that gets thrown around the internet, but it is definitely the most elaborate calendar that any ancient civilization made, and it's because it's comprised of multiple cycles.
Wow.
The first one that they ever made is called their sacred calendar, and it is 260 days, no months, no weeks, just a combination of 20-day names kind of revolving through 13 numbers. So there's 20-day names and 13 numbers, and they work kind of like cogs in a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when it gets to 13 number and it goes back to number 1, we're only on the 14th of the 20. So those revolve around to give us 260 unique days in a cycle.
Wow.
That 20 times 13 is 260.
Wow.
But it's weird because what cycle are they estimating? That's not the sun, right? We do 365 days. Most of the world now does a solar calendar. And our months kind of represent the cycles of the moon that are roughly 30 days. But our modern Gregorian one is tweaked in ways that totally separate it from the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But this 260-day cycle, which they made first, and it was the only calendar they were using for centuries as far as archaeology can see, our best guess is that they pegged 260 days because it's 9 months.
Mm.
It's the human gestation period.
Wow.
I think that's beautiful. Like if we're right about that, and I don't think we have any other better explanation, not to mention that modern Maya love that answer. They've
Mm.
embraced it. They
Cool.
either knew it already or that sounds right down the line to them.
Cool.
Uh, when they thought, well, we want to start recording time. We want to start discussing yesterday and tomorrow and maybe even record some of our history. They didn't look up to the heavens. They looked inside themselves. They said, what is a uniquely human cycle? And they
Mm.
picked the human gestation period. And there's
Wow.
lots of poorly understood texts in the past that I think allude to the fact that they're talking about, as they say these days in a row, they say this day, like 13 Keeb is born.
Mm.
They talk about, there's a lot of birth symbolism in the way that the hieroglyphs talk about this calendar.
Oh, that's
Fascinating
fascinating.
and beautiful. And I don't know, if anybody knows of another culture that did this, please let me know. I think it's Mesoamerica alone that decided to look inside of ourselves instead of up to the heavens for our unique cycle.
That's fascinating for sure. Well,
It is.
I know you.
The second one they made is the solar one.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, yeah, we're probably running out of time here. Solar, easy, 365 days. Some cultures in Mesoamerica broke it up into 18 months of 20 days and a final 19th one of just 5 to make 365.
Mm-hmm.
But that's then they combined those two calendars, 260 and 365. Those would come up with a unique day every 52 years.
Wow.
So then they had this 52-year cycle. And we see that all over the hieroglyphs, and it survives really into today. But the Aztec called it the new fire ceremony, where they would on purpose set buildings on fire, then make a new one there. They would change the way they lived. They would totally celebrate the new cycle and saw it not as they saw that kind of almost Hindu like how destruction and rebirth are hand in hand. The
Mm.
cyclical nature of life was celebrated every 52 years.
Wow, that's
Those are
fascinating.
our two big cycles. Now, there are more, and the long count is the most mysterious of them, but perhaps we'd run over time if I tried to explain that one.
Yeah, well, definitely send people to your link too, and I do appreciate your time. I'm just curious, real quick, if you were going to die today, what would you want to say to the world?
Oh gosh, that's that's heavy. That's
Yeah.
easy. That gets right down to do I have things to say to the world? I hope so. I guess if my mission in my short time on this planet is to wake us up that there were major civilizations in not just the Americas but North America that we need to remember and honor, not in a kind of like apologetic way, just recognize that these cultures were there. I think that it's been a tragedy that the the kind of shame that a lot of Americans feel about how the whole European and American Indian contact went down with the tragedies of disease and the malfeasance around that.
Hmm.
We kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't even want to discuss just how great these civilizations were because it just piles on the shame that they got annihilated because we showed up. But we can skip that whole ugly period and just more purely talk about, you know, the memory of the civilizations that were there centuries before that dark moment in human history happened.
Mm.
So if I could say one thing, it would be something along the lines of recognize and celebrate the great cultures of the Americas long before contact.
Mm. That's beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing that. It's been a really good time talking to you, and I look forward to diving deeper into your work, and I know a lot of people will be really excited too as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun. Invite me on again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.